Welcome back to another edition of Through the Smoke, a Miami Hurricanes football and recruiting podcast here on the 24/7 Sports Network. David Lake, joined as always by Gabby Urrutia. We got another official visit weekend coming up, so want to preview the guys expected in this weekend in Coral Gables. And that's what the main focus of this podcast will be. But before we dive into things here, of course, want to shout out our sponsors and direct you all to support the people that support us, starting with Canes Connection. That, of course, is Miami's collective. They play a significant role in these talent acquisition efforts. Miami wants to go get a top 10 class this cycle. Canes Connection helps make that possible. So go to canesconnection.com and sign up for any kind of membership tier that best suits you. You get some perks depending on the membership tier you choose, and it's a cool way to be a part of the community at a grassroots level. Also want to highlight our guy Nick Musarino at the Musarino Law Group. If you've been injured in a car accident, he's the guy I would trust to go maximize what I need out of that situation. And you can get in touch with Nick at 561-960-9870 or visit the MusarinoLawGroup.com. Nick is a diehard Miami Hurricane. He'll even love talking Canes with you if you tell him Through the Smoke sent you. So go support the people that support this show. Gabby, before we start to preview next weekend, I think it's good to kind of let the official visit buzz from the past weekend kind of marinate a little bit. And there's always some, tidbits or buzz or trends maybe that, in a good or bad way, that's worth maybe sharing on the podcast here because, I think coming out of an official visit, there's always that high, right? Like there's really no such thing as a bad official visit. They're all good experiences. But you kind of really get a feel for how things went, once you get past the 48-hour mark, 72-hour mark. And we're kind of at that mark now. And look, we're not going to run through every single player that visited this past weekend, but I am curious if you've heard any type of buzz, good or bad, Miami's way with the previous weekend official visitors you think is worth sharing.
Yeah, a couple guys, David. Again, we can't run through everyone, but two of the guys at the top I definitely want to touch on. Starting with five-star defensive lineman Lamar Brown. This is a guy that throughout his official visit weekend was on social media and active, saying all of the right things about his time in Coral Gables. And again, I think just as we let this thing breathe a little bit more, I do think that Miami made a real move with Lamar Brown this weekend. Kind of wrote after the official visit weekend that the sense was maybe even that Texas A&M was the school to perhaps be watching more closely than LSU. LSU, of course, still a factor in there, but I think the Aggies are really, really making a run at Lamar Brown. So is Miami. I think Miami's I kind of viewed this as a two teams at the top with LSU and Texas A&M at the top. I think Miami is kind of broken into that top tier as far as just really being in a competitive position to eventually potentially land a guy like five-star Lamar Brown. So I think it was a super successful official visit weekend. I think even dating back to the full party when he first visited, I think Miami felt like they were recruiting him harder than anyone. I think that's a sentiment that Lamar Brown has kind of continued to pass along, that no one's recruited him quite like Miami. And I do think that the Hurricanes made a real move there. So I think Lamar Brown is one that we got to kind of continue tracking long term. Miami feels like this is the type of interior defensive lineman that they need to land if they want to compete for championships long term. So I think this is one that Miami's going to continue to kind of press all the right buttons on, continue to kind of, really, really try to get this thing done across the finish line. So let's see if they can beat Texas A&M. Let's see if they can kind of continue to position themselves in a better place than LSU maybe. But this is one that's going to kind of continue to go down to the wire. But I do feel good about the move that Miami made to kind of take those proper next steps in this recruitment.
That's good.
Yeah, another
Long way to
guy.
go.
Yeah,
He's June 6th, so this weekend he's going to visit Texas, then Texas A&M, then LSU. He's supposed to announce July 10th. So a long way to go, a lot of twists and turns still, but Miami being in the mix is certainly good news. Who else are you hearing some tidbit, or is there any other buzz worth talking about here from last week's bunch?
Yeah, I think Tristan Keys too. Just signed or maybe formally signed with Adidas. I think we've always kind of had the buzz that he was kind of an Adidas guy, but I think Adidas went forward, kind of promoted that he was an Adidas athlete, the number one wide receiver in the country. Miami is of course one of the flagship programs for the Three Stripes. You know, does that tie Tristan Keys to an Adidas school? I don't think so. Adidas has athletes like Tyler Atkinson, who is visiting Oregon and is considering Clemson and Georgia and Ohio State, and basically not considering an Adidas school at all. So I'm not sure if that's something that to like look too deep into as far as just like, oh, this guy has to now go to an Adidas school because he's affiliated with the brand. Not sure if that's quite the case, but I do think it's notable that Tristan Keys
Yeah.
is an Adidas athlete. Again, Miami is doing all that they can to kind of, position themselves to flip Tristan Keys from LSU. I think that Miami is one of the prime contenders in that recruitment. And I don't think it hurts that Adidas
Right.
is involved now with Miami being so involved. It's not like a Tyler Atkinson where there's just not really an Adidas school that fits. Miami is a school that fits. Miami is a school that's doing all the right things and, again, pressing all the right buttons with Tristan Keys. And now he's formally affiliated with Adidas. So again, maybe just something to track. Not saying that's the end all be all or that tells the whole tale or that's a sign of where things are headed. But I do think it is worth noting that Tristan Keys and Adidas have kind of entered into a formal partnership with Miami, making a really, really strong run at him.
Yeah, and I think technically, even by the rules, the NCAA rules, apparel companies aren't allowed to necessarily push any, high school recruit to a school, right? By the rules. So that type of NIL deal can't happen technically, but I do think it is notable. There's certainly I think it doesn't hurt is probably the best way to put it. LSU, who he's committed to now, is a Nike school. He's also looking at Bama, who I believe is Nike as well. Tennessee, I don't remember what Tennessee is. They used to be Adidas back in the day. I don't know
Yeah, I
what they
think
are
they're
now.
Nike. I think they're Nike. I think they're actually transitioning back to Adidas, is the word on the
Okay.
street with Tennessee.
And
I'm
then
not sure when that's
Auburn,
like formal though.
Auburn is still Under Armour,
I
correct?
think they're transitioning to Nike now. I think this will be
Okay.
their first year back with Nike.
Okay. So, I mean, how much does all this matter? Who knows? But it is interesting as you're pursuing a five-star prospect, top five player in the country. Every little detail matters. So that is interesting. All right. Let's dive into this week's official visitors, expected official visitors. Gabby, this week, so last week, the first weekend, there were no, well, there's one commit, right? Camden
Right.
Portis. This week, there is six. And so we'll just start on the front end, grouping these six together. We don't need to go into them super detailed because we've talked about them a bunch here on the podcast when they did commit, right? But there's five-star offensive lineman Jackson Cantwell, four-star corner Jalen Waters, four-star linebacker Jordan Campbell, three-star quarterback Darian Coleman, three-star cornerback Jontavius Wyman, and three-star offensive lineman Joel Irvin. So this group of six commits is going to be joining 11 uncommitted players. Uh, Gabby, what's the significance of that just in terms of like recruiting efforts? Having a player like a Jackson Cantwell, who I believe is still the number one composite player in the country right
Right.
now. Um, anytime he's going to help recruit a line of scrimmage player, you would assume that would help. Also, too, just from a standpoint of, recruiting never stops. And just because guys are committed to a school doesn't mean that other schools aren't recruiting them still. So, are there any of these commits worth keeping an eye on from like a standpoint of other schools circling the waters there on those players and Miami needing to lock them down this weekend?
I think maybe the most notable in that regard is linebacker Jordan Campbell. Played at Carroll City, now at Miami Northwestern. Visited Florida State unofficially last week, talking up the Knowles. He's been a pretty active visitor to other campuses this spring. I think he's gone up to Florida. He's gone up to Nebraska. I think Auburn is another school that's kind of been making a run at him. So I think this is a big weekend for just like, hey, where do things sort of stand here? I know internally Miami really likes Jordan Campbell. They think that he's a really, really good player, kind of an athlete, a guy who can kind of play off the edge, maybe a bit of a tweener between kind of an edge and a linebacker. I think, trying to sort out what exactly it looks like for him. I think Jordan Campbell himself is kind of figuring out whether he's an edge or a linebacker. But I think regardless, Miami loves the athleticism and loves what he brings to the table, and they absolutely want to keep him in this class. So I think that this weekend is a big opportunity for the Hurricanes to get him back just around the program. He's been around a ton. This isn't unfamiliar. It's not like he hasn't been around in a bit or this is kind of fading. I think that Miami wants to keep Jordan Campbell, and they're going to have to kind of fight off some of these other programs looking to flip him. So I think that this will be an important weekend for him. I think a lot of these other guys are pretty locked in, right? Joel Irvin is a guy that Miami locked in this spring. I think they feel really good about where things are at with him. You got Jackson Cantwell coming in. We saw the magnitude of that commitment and everything that went into it. And I feel good if Miami landed him despite those circumstances, just kind of hanging on. And the rest of the guys, I think this is a good group of dudes who will eventually sign with Miami. So I think Jordan Campbell's the one's being maybe pursued the most, or maybe the most up in the air. Jalen Waters has some other schools that are after him as well. And look, he's slipped twice in the past. Again, this is one of those things where you have to just keep recruiting, but I feel good about Miami's path to signing Jalen Waters as well. So for the most part, feel really strongly about this group of commitments eventually signing.
Personality wise, do you think Jackson Cantwell is going to be a guy that, particularly what I'm envisioning is like defensive lineman. Hey,
Right.
iron sharpens iron. Come join me at Miami, and we'll both benefit from the competition at practice. Do you think he's that type of guy that will lean into that role?
I hope so because you got some good defensive linemen coming in, right? You got a guy like Bryce Perry Wright, who is a 5-star for us at 24/7 Sports out of Buford, Georgia. A guy who's down to Texas and Texas A&M and Clemson alongside Miami. So Miami battling some top programs. Miami views him as a defensive end, so someone that Jackson Cantwell could kind of look at and say, "Hey, we're going to go at it every day in practice. Like no one's going to get you better than me." That so I think that that's a great opportunity for him as well. Got guys like James Johnson, who's more of an interior guy. Who knows if that's something that he can maybe work on. You got a big guy like Tyson Bacon, and then so I think with defensive linemen, I think it's kind of maybe to be determined if Jackson Cantwell is going to be that guy who's going to kind of put on the recruiting cap and really go to work. I hope he is, but I'm not sure if that's kind of the way that he's wired. I think where I think we can maybe see more of the Jackson Cantwell impact is maybe with guys like Brett Koolage. We'll get into the group,
Yeah.
here soon, but Brett Koolage is one of Miami's top interior offensive line targets. So is Canon Picket. Both of those guys are going to be in on this visit. So Miami's top two remaining offensive line targets are going to be here. So where I think Jackson Cantwell can maybe, make himself some recruiting money or, get him, kind of work his chops a little bit would be just with Brett Koolage, a guy who I really like. I think that that would be just a tremendous finish to an already large offensive line class if Miami's able to close it out with Brett Koolage and really Canon Pickett, a legacy prospect that Miami really likes as well. I think there's a good chance that Miami lands at least one of those guys. If you can get both, that's awesome, but at least one. But if it's Brett Koolage, if Brett Koolage is a guy that Jackson Cantwell can help sway to Miami after, a long recruitment, Koolage is extremely familiar with the Hurricanes. I think that that would be a big win. So we'll see what happens, man. And I think, Darion Coleman got to kind of put him to the test too. Some top uncommitted guys, not a lot of receivers, just one receiver, not a lot of offensive skill guys, but I still think Darion Coleman could play a role and see what he can do on a weekend like this.
All right, let's dive into this week's official visitors. And let's start at the top with the 5-star. You mentioned him already, but Bryce Perry Wright, 5-star according to 24/7 Sports. He goes 6'2", 250 at a Buford High School, that powerhouse school in the state of Georgia. Georgia. He's visited Auburn, Clemson, and is set to visit Texas and Texas A&M still. He does have a Clemson crystal ball. He
Yeah.
finished his junior season with 57 tackles, 13 tackles for loss, and 9 sacks. What do we need to know about Bryce Perry Wright as it relates to Miami?
Yeah, someone that Miami views as kind of a defensive end. I think he's listed as a defensive lineman, which I think some people would kind of assume he's an interior guy. I think he can definitely play the interior, but I think Miami kind of views him as a Ruben Bainish type of defensive end. Again, not prototypical size at the 6'2", 250-pound mark. Ruben Bain was like 6'2", probably 260-ish coming out of Miami Central. So I think very much in that mold body type wise. And Look, like similar. I've said this about some other guys, but Miami kind of already has that role kind of carved out with a guy like Ruben Bain potentially moving on after this year. I think the blueprint is kind of set for Bryce Wright to kind of come in, be an early contributor if he's able to kind of get going at the college level. And there is some family ties to the program. He is related in some way, shape, or form. Not sure how loosely or tightly to the legendary Ray Lewis, who, of course, is an NFL Hall of Famer and played his college football at Miami. And I think that's something that's kind of keeping Miami in the game. They were on the outside looking in this spring, got him back on campus, and kind of reemerged as a top contender for Bryce Wright. So I think that this is a big weekend to kind of see where Miami stands with him. If they can beat Clemson, Clemson just had their only official visit weekend of the summer. He did not commit to them. He is taking more visits, which is notable because Clemson tends to load up after that first official visit weekend. And so we'll see if Miami can make up some ground there, and then again kind of fight off some other SEC programs like A&M and Texas who are still to come.
But it's fair to say you view right now Clemson as kind of the team to beat for him.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say at this point. I think Miami's up there, and I think they can potentially make a move there. But I think Clemson is probably the leader in the clubhouse going into the weekend.
In terms of like when you watch his tape, and this is kind of tomato tomato, you bring up the Ruben Bain comp. I think that's fair. What I thought of when I watched him was Akeem Mesidor. I felt, watching his highlight, if Akeem Mesidor was a big time recruit, and the thing holding Mesidor back then was his frame. His frame just needed to fill out, grow a little bit more coming out of high school. But I feel like they're very similar type of players. Bryce Wright has a higher ceiling because he does, go into his senior season with more of those traits. But both are kind of tweeners. Both are kind of high motor guys. Both are good against the run and the pass as a pass rusher, and you can play both in multiple different type of fronts. So this is a compliment, saying he's kind of like a higher ceiling Akeem Mesidor. That's what I see. Uh, to me, I think Bain was just a higher level, honestly.
Right.
But good player, and I think nowadays you need defensive linemen that can line up in multiple spots. And while he's 6'2", and you'd like all your defensive linemen to be 6'5", he is a guy that really gets after it and closes on the quarterback or the ball carrier, whoever it may be. So yeah, he's a big time player. That'd be a big time addition. Let's stay on the defensive line, and let's go local. Local now, James Johnson, who is a 4-star, number 90 overall player in the country, according to 24/7 Sports, 6'3", 285. Played his junior year at North Fort Myers High School, transfers to Miami Northwestern this offseason. He visited Georgia last weekend. He will visit Florida next weekend. Very impressive player when you pull up his tape. Very powerful, kind of a game-wrecking defensive tackle. And those are rare nowadays in South Florida. So Miami's got to lock this type of player down. What are the vibes here? What are the feelings going into this visit with James Johnson? Because you could argue he is one of the more important players in this class that Miami needs to find a way to just get on board.
Right, 100%. I think that's kind of like the vibe I get, that this is just the type of guy that Miami needs to add, especially uh, just considering where he's at now, just being a guy who's spending his senior season in Dade County, a Southwest Florida guy, so still relatively local as far as just a proximity and all of those things. This is just not the type of kid that Miami can allow to leave the area at a position like this, that you need to develop these guys from the high school ranks because they get extremely expensive to go get them in the transfer portal. James Johnson, now's the time to go get a player like James Johnson. There's a lot that's kind of lined up for Miami to make an impressive move like this. Again, I think Georgia is a real player. I think that is a situation to watch. I think Florida is always one to watch in a recruitment like this, but I think that this is an extremely important weekend for Miami to kind of set the bar as far as just where things stand with James Johnson and them. They've done a good job to this point of just kind of establishing that base. But I think this weekend it needs to get kind of turned up to that next level to try to actually get this kid on board because he's too good of a prospect. Again, in South Florida, at a position that's not necessarily deep, just
Yeah.
nationally. Like I think that this is just one of those guys that, this has got to be an all hands on deck type of weekend with James Johnson, and Miami needs to really position themselves to land him.
Very violent player, and his tape is fun. Fun defensive tackle tape to watch. He's kind of like, making all these Miami Hurricanes comps just because, I think that's a fair point of reference. But to me, he's like a much advanced at the same stage version of like Ahmad Moten. Like you see Ahmad
Right.
Moten now, flash. He doesn't do it consistently. That's kind of the challenge for him moving forward as an older player now, but he flashes the ability to be powerful, get into the backfield, and finish plays in the backfield. James Johnson's doing that at the high school level, and it's impressive. So he's got a high ceiling, and he's a big time player in South Florida this cycle that Miami needs to find a way to keep home. All right, let's stay kind of on the line of scrimmage. This is a jumbo athlete in four-star tight end Hezi Kent, who is the number 167 overall player in the country, according to 24/7 Sports. He's listed in the profile 6'5", 300. When I saw him with my own eyes, he was probably 6'5", 300 last summer. I know, Gabby, you've mentioned on a podcast here recently, he's worked hard to shed some weight.
Yeah.
Um, he's out of Brunswick High School in the state of Georgia, Southern Georgia, and he's already visited Florida. He's also set to visit Georgia Tech, Texas, and Florida State. He's been a guy that we've talked about on the podcast for a while. He's been on Miami's radar for a while. Um, what are the vibes here?
Yeah, I think this is a super important weekend, and we've been saying it for a while, but it seems like this is kind of shaping up to be a Miami Florida battle. As you mentioned, David, he visited Florida last week. He's at Miami this week, so I think that there should be a decent amount of clarity as far as where things are at after this weekend. I know coming into the weekend, Miami still feels really good about where they stand. I mean the Gators are a very very real threat here. There is a close tie between his high school head coach and Russ Callaway, Florida's tight ends coach, that dates back, to the point that they're just like very close friends in real life. Um, so I think that that's always just a natural concern. But Miami, again, this has been a top priority for the program. It's been a top priority for Cody Woodle, for Mario Cristobal throughout this process. Again, you mentioned the size. They had him in camp last year, David. You watched him. I was on paternity leave at the time, so I unfortunately did not, but you would know better than me as far as just the movement skills. But Miami's truly all in here on developing him as an inline tight end. So a guy who
Yeah.
is primarily going to be working on the line of scrimmage, potentially attached to the line of scrimmage, in some heavy personnel packages, but they also feel like he has the flexibility to legitimately be able to catch the ball and run and make some plays, in situations where he would need to do that. But as I often get pointed out, Elijah Arroyo caught however many amount of passes he caught, but he played like 800 snaps. So on 750 of his snaps, he's mostly just blocking or seven, or a ton of. This is a guy that they primarily view as a blocking tight end, and they think that he is a must get type of guy as they look to continue to establish and dominate the line of scrimmage at Miami. So we'll see where things stand kind of coming out of it. I know not everyone views him as a tight end. Not everyone agrees that he can be a tight end. Miami is all in on it. So
Yeah.
we'll see where things go after this weekend. But I think it's a Miami Florida battle. I think Texas is kind of lingering as that third school who I'd probably classify as a wild card right now. I could see him following through with that visit and being, enticed by that. But I think it's Miami and Florida who put in the most legwork here. And ultimately, I think it'll be one of those two schools at the end of the day.
Yeah, jumbo athlete is the best way to describe him. And I think the bottom line is get a player like this in your program. And I think it's more than fair. Let him play tight end, see how that goes. If it, doesn't work out at tight end, he has the ability to be a really good offensive lineman too. So, um, yeah, let him play tight end. His movement skills are impressive at his size last year that were on display at that camp. So, it's impressive at his size what he can do, and he's just got a big athletic frame, and you can never have too many of those type of guys in your program. All right, let's stay on offense. Let's go to four-star wide receiver Braden Robinson. This is an
Yeah.
interesting one, Gabby. He's a 90 grade 4-star according to 24/7 Sports. Red Oak High School in the state of Texas. He's listed at 5'8", 160. He visited Arizona last week, will visit Notre Dame later this month. Why is this guy on the radar for Miami? He's highly productive. Finished his junior season with 1,400 yards, 15 touchdowns on 79 receptions. When you watch his tape, he's listed at 5'8". I wonder if he's more like a 5'6" type of
Yeah,
receiver.
he is.
But I would, you know, I'm a fan of taking this type of guy once in a while, all day long. Miami just had a productive outlier of a receiver, slot receiver, in Xavier Restrepo. This is a different type of productive outlier. Restrepo's outlier was kind of his speed was not, what you would want. With Robinson, he's 5'6", right? So, but it's the same idea in a big picture sense. Both guys know how to produce. Both guys know how to get open. Both guys have that feel for how to get open. I will say one thing in Robinson's bag that he has over Restrepo is he can be a big time contributor on special teams
Right.
as a returner. So I'm intrigued by this. I like that they're at least bringing him in, see what they think, if it's a good match for each other. We know how productive slot receivers are in this style of offense. I just think this is an interesting move that Miami's making here with Braden Robinson.
Right, and he's a guy who visited in the spring too. And to your point, David, I mean, 5'8" is I like to think I'm like 5'8", 5'9" ish, and he's smaller than I am, and I'm not a very big person. Um, so yeah, I mean, he is a smaller guy, but I think where a lot of that value comes in is on the special teams too, right? Like the way that you can kind of move him around, do different types of things with him, and just that speed. I think that speed is hard to, and just like the twitchiness and the quickness is hard to it's hard to ignore. And Miami's definitely exploring this as an option. Notre Dame is extremely high on him too. So it'll be interesting to see what the vibe is kind of coming out of this weekend. The receiver board, I think in general, is just kind of a work in progress. I think Miami
Yeah.
is going to bring all these kids in on visits and kind of sort it out after. So I'm curious what the feel on Braden Robinson is going to be coming out of the weekend because last weekend of the summer, they're going to bring guys like Van Spafford and Jason Lopez, two guys they're super high on as, again, potential
Yeah.
slot type of receivers as
Lopez
well.
is
So,
good.
so I
Yeah.
think that there are still other options on the table. If I were making the odds, I'm not sure if I would categorize Miami as the favorite right now. I think probably lean Notre Dame, but again, let's see what the feel is kind of coming out of the weekend, and if things change there.
Yeah, there's lots of options. You just got to find the one that fits. Jason Lopez would also be a tremendous fit.
Yeah.
But anyways, let's move on to another guy who I found interesting after watching his tape. Um, 4-star defensive back Devin Jackson, who's a safety, 90 grade according to 24/7 Sports, listed at 6'2", 200 pounds from First Academy in Orlando. He's already visited LSU. He will visit Oregon and Nebraska as well later this month. He was committed to Florida. I think he committed last summer, maybe last July. That's notable because Will Harris was the coach at Florida during that time. Will Harris is now at Miami. Gabby, I like this guy. I'll admit I didn't know much about him when I started digging into him, and his tape really impressed me. I think he has everything you want as a safety at the college level. He's very comfortable in coverage. He tackles well. He's willing to be physical, and you can tell on his highlight that he has a high football intelligence. He knows where to be and where he needs to be in relation to an offensive play that's forming in front of him. So he finished last year with 80 tackles, 7 PBUs, 2 interceptions, 1 forced fumble. I think he's a big time player. To me, like the comp I always make with these type of safeties is like a Rayshawn Jenkins, just a guy who kind of can do everything well. He kind of reminded me of uh, Hilton Stubbs last year, the guy who was committed to Miami for much of the cycle and then flipped to Florida at the end. Just kind of a do-it-all safety and with length and size. I really liked him, and my radar is definitely up. I care now about if Miami lands Devin Jackson or not.
And he's a big body too. Like he's not like he's a guy that's going to come in and I think he's already going to check off a lot of like the physical, boxes. He's definitely a legit 6'2". He's pushing 200 pounds. He's probably going to be able to add mass to that pretty quickly. Just looking at him and seeing the way that he's already built. So a physically impressive safety as well. Miami's been really just all in on Devin Jackson. He visited for the first spring practice back in March. He came back again decommitted from Florida shortly after that. He committed to Will Harris at Florida, so there's that long-lasting relationship with Will Harris. Zach Etheridge has been all in on it too. Both those guys kind of attacking this thing. When he decommitted from Florida, I threw a note on our board saying, "Hey, I would watch Miami closely here. I think Miami's in a really competitive spot here." His recruitment kind of did blow up,
Yeah.
David. I think this spring with LSU getting involved and Oregon getting involved, I think that kind of makes it a little bit more interesting.
That tells you how good he is too.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And look, I think Miami needs to find a way to start stacking safeties of this caliber and of this
Yeah.
type of this mold.
The body
And
type. They
right,
need
right,
more of this.
for sure. So you mentioned the Hilton Stubbs comp. Miami would have loved to have him last cycle. They did not want to lose him. Adding a guy like that in Devin Jackson and kind of figuring it out with him, I think is super important. So Devin Jackson, I know, is a priority for the program, and coming into the visit, I know Miami's done a lot of legwork here. So again, we'll see where things are at coming out of it, but I don't hate where Miami's positioned coming into the weekend.
You watch some of his spring game highlights he put up there too. He's a natural receiver. Like he's making plays at wide receiver in his spring game, which of course matters, right?
Yeah.
Defense nowadays, a lot about takeaways. So he has that element in his game as well. All right, let's stay at DB. Three-star athlete Tyreek Green, 89 grade composite. He's a four-star player, number 151 overall, 89 grade according to 24/7 Sports. Listed at 5'10", 191. He's at a Buford High School in Georgia as well. He's already visited Auburn. He will visit FSU and Georgia. He has a Georgia crystal ball. He's listed as an athlete because he plays running back and safety in high school. To me, this is my opinion. To me, he's more of a nickel in college.
Right.
Um, and you watch his tape. He's just that classic, like, good football player that you want on your team. But what are the vibes here with Miami?
Yeah, I love me some Tyreek Green, man. Some people around him in the Atlanta area think that he is an awesome football player, an awesome athlete. I think he absolutely projects, probably somewhere in that nickel type of role, but I think he's a guy that he can do a little bit of everything. Again, this is a guy that I'm not sure exactly where things stand with Miami. I know they really like him. Georgia's in the mix. They've taken a bundle of safeties so far, or and defensive backs in their class of 2026. They just took Justice Fitzpatrick, who is listed as a cornerback, but I think a lot of schools view as a safety. I think they have like four other guys with safety designations on their profile. Maybe not all four of those guys take them, but I'm curious to see where Georgia kind of is in this one. Miami's in the mix, Florida State's in the mix, Auburn in there too. But again, I think if it's not Georgia, I think Miami has a really, really good chance in this recruitment, depending on how hard they decide to push. But if we're talking about just like difference maker type of nickels, you look at what they just added in Keontae Scott and what the value that the program is kind of placing in having a true nickel. I think Tyreek Green is the guy who makes a ton of sense to potentially fill into a similar type of role. And again, he's a guy that's versatile that you can kind of place, you can kind of, put him back up top and he can do a couple of different things for you. He's physical. He plays that running back spot. I think he has great vision. And again, people around him just are buzzing about him. So this is a guy that I would love for Miami to add to the class and maybe figure out exactly what it looks like some other time.
Let's go back to the offensive line and let's talk about three-star offensive lineman Brett Koolage, who you mentioned earlier. He's at 89 grade, so he's on that three-star, four-star bubble. He's out of IMG Academy, 6'5", 320. He's already visited Florida State. He's going to visit Georgia and Tennessee. And Gabby, I know you mentioned earlier you're a big fan of Koolage. I'm in the same boat. I think, like, to me, if I'm making a Miami Hurricanes comp on the podcast here, to me he's like Inez Cooper all over again. Like a big-bodied guard that really cares about football, kind of an alpha personality, and he's just going to be a multi-year starter at the college level. Um, I think the 89 grade's fair because the physical traits and athleticism might not be, 4-star caliber. But to me, he's going to hit. And to me, like, I think he's got a chance to be an NFL guard because of his mindset, his frame, and just how he's going to figure it out. But if I'm Miami, and look, they have what, 5 guys committed on the
Right.
offensive line already. If I'm Miami, I figure a way to get this guy in the class because similar to an Ez Cooper, he's going to be a multi-year starter, and there's a
Yeah.
lot of value in that.
Yeah, to me, Brett Koolage is someone that like there's no doubt in my mind that this guy starts for
Yeah.
multiple years at Miami. I think he's just that type of guy. You mentioned Inez Cooper. I think he's probably got a lot less weight shed. He's a guy that's going to
Yeah.
get in January rather than later on in the summer. Like I think Brett Koolage is someone who, regardless of where he goes, is going to find his way onto an NFL roster someday.
Yep.
Wouldn't be surprised if he ends up getting drafted. Again, he's just kind of like that mean interior lineman that I would just bank on long term to just to figure it out and end up helping a program. And with the way Miami wants to kind of be along the offensive line, just kind of again mean, physical, own the line of
He's
scrimmage
what
and
they
run the
want.
ball. Yeah,
Like a
he's
prototype guard.
yes,
That's what
a hundred
that's what
percent.
they want.
100%. Like they want their interior linemen to be Brett Coolidge. So Alex Miraball's been in on this one for a long time. Was one of the first coaches to offer Brett Coolidge back when he was still at in Colorado. Has since transferred to IMG. He's been there the last few years, and Miraball's been all in here. So I think that this is a huge weekend for Miami. You mentioned all these other programs that are coming after him: the Ohio States, Georgias, Tennessees, Oklahomas, all these guys. It's a lot of these major programs that kind of want him. Georgia, is definitely
Mhm.
in there too. So I think Miami's in the upper half of schools that he's considering. Watching the Dogs closely, I think that that's a school that he's always been high on. But I think Miami has a real shot in this recruitment. And again, I think that this is going to be a big weekend for Miami and Brett Koolage.
Let's stay on the offensive line and discuss Canon Picket, who you mentioned
Yeah,
earlier as well. 87 grade, according to 24/7 Sports, 6'4", 320 at a Tampa Bay Tech. He visited Clemson last weekend. Will also visit Florida later this month. To me, solid offensive lineman with family ties to Miami. Um, he doesn't have the type of frame that like a Brett Koolage does, but Cannon does have some athleticism to his game,
yeah.
and you know it, it's always about stacking big athletic frames on the line of scrimmage and letting the cream rise to the top. And so landing a guy like Canon Pickett would be a big deal for Miami as well.
For sure. And Miami loves Canon Pickett, and they think that he could be a good player for them down the line. Again, and he listed as I guess, an interior lineman. I don't know why the composite
To
shows
me,
him as an
that's what
offensive
he
tackle.
is.
Yeah, he's an interior lineman. To me, he's a guard all the way. I think he's someone that again, you just develop. He's a big athletic, but he is athletic. And
Yeah,
I think he has
he
the right
moves well.
mentality. Yeah, he has the right mentality too. And long term, I'm not sure how quickly it's gonna all maybe come together for Canon Pickett. Maybe the way I think it could come together for a guy like Brett Koolage. But
Right.
I still think that Canon Pickett at some point down the line can help Miami win some ball games. So
I think
uh,
he could even be a center if he wanted to
yeah,
be.
for sure. Yeah, he has the flexibility I think to play all three of those interior
Yeah.
positions if he so chooses, or just depending on where it clicks. And look, I think Miami will throw him into all sorts of different scenarios. You mentioned the legacy stuff. You got Clemson in there. You got Florida in there. I have a hard time seeing him not pick Miami at the end of the
Yeah.
day. So just a matter of what this kind of ends up looking like for Miami. If they can maybe land a guy like Kenny Pickett and a guy like Brett Koolage, you only got room for one? To me, I would take both, not think about it, figure it all out later. But
Yeah.
yeah, Cannon Pickett is someone that I would pencil into Miami's class for sure.
Let's go on the defensive line of scrimmage and let's discuss 3-star defensive end Kosi Okpala, who is an 89 grade, 6'2", 230 at a Maid Creek High School in Houston, Texas. He has visited Penn State. He will visit Baylor and Texas. He's an interesting player. He finished 2024 with 55 tackles, 17 tackles for loss, 5 sacks, and 2 forced fumbles. He's your undersized but twitched up pass rusher. He's going to be a total like situational guy at the college level, but these types of players have tremendous value because he can affect the quarterback. He has nice get off, nice bend, knows how to finish pressures into sacks with his closing speed. So he's an interesting player. And what do we need to know here about Kosi?
Yeah, this is a spring eval for Jason Taylor and this Miami staff, a guy they went to go see out in Houston this spring. They offered him, kept quickly kind of transitioned that into an official visit. Texas is the leader on the crystal ball. Talking with some of the guys over at Horns 247, I think that this is someone that ultimately ends up in the Longhorns class. But again, opportunity for Miami to kind of see where things are at. You mentioned Penn State is in the mix there. Baylor, who's been doing a good job of recruiting in the state of Texas, is involved there. And then, of course, you got the Longhorns on the back end of things. So a lot of the right programs are kind of in the mix here. So another one where I'm just kind of curious to see where things stand after the weekend and if Miami's a true competitor or if this is just one that's continuing to trend towards Texas.
All right, let's say on the D line, 3-star Freddie Wilson out of Spruce Creek High School in Port Orange, Florida. 88 grade, according to 24/7 Sports. He goes 6'2", 265. He visited Minnesota already. He will visit Georgia Tech and Houston. Finished his junior year with 65 tackles, 7 tackles for loss, and 5 sacks. Looks like when you watch him, like he's your typical guy that, the body type is kind of still growing, still maturing, still developing. I think he's got some rotational upside at a place like Miami, which I'm fine with. I think you got to take those guys. You don't want to chase rotational defensive linemen in the portal because when you're
Right.
playing that game, you have to overpay for guys that are only playing 150 to 250 snaps a year. So Freddie Wilson's an interesting eval. What can you tell us about him?
Yeah, this is a guy I think they ran into or they identified pretty early on in the process. I think Miami was one of, if not the first, Power Four offer out to Freddie Wilson. I think they were recruiting his teammate. His name escapes me as we're recording this, but I think he ended up signing with Georgia Tech. Miami was
Yeah,
hoping to get him,
last
and
year.
yeah,
Yeah.
I can't remember his name right now. Which it'll click to me when we're done recording this, and I'm gonna kick myself, but. This is a guy that's been on Miami's campus. He visited for games in the fall last year. Has been around plenty. And to your point, David, this is probably a rotational guy, but those are important because we kind of go through
Yeah.
these preseason things and we're just like, I wish I wish we felt a little bit better about the fifth or sixth defensive lineman or fourth, fifth, sixth defensive lineman. Like Freddie Wilson down the line could potentially be a guy who maybe fills a role like that. You got schools like Minnesota who do a good job of recruiting and identifying. They're in the mix. You got schools like Houston and I think Georgia Tech are also in the mix as well. So, a few schools, kind of that mid tier of the Big Ten and the ACC and Big 12 that are also involved. Again, from Miami, I think these guys have value as those rotational guys, depending on what your class looks like. Because if you're number 3 or number 4 defensive tackle in a class, you can still get a really good player in there. Not to say Freddie Wilson's
Yeah.
not, but that's a win too. But I think these are the guys that you still need to recruit. You still need to do your homework on because they do have value, and again, they can be expensive later on in the process if it comes down to that.
So there's so many names to remember. I'm not hating on you by bringing this up, but his name is Derry Norris.
Derry Norris, yep, Derry
Fro-
Norris. There we go.
and he did sign with Georgia Tech. He visited last year, the second official visit
Yep.
weekend as well. So, um, yeah, they were teammates at Spruce Creek. Okay, and last one, 3-star defensive lineman Tyson Bacon, who has an 86 grade. He is a composite 4-star, but an 86 grade from 24/7 Sports. Listed at 6'3", 263. He's out of Hoover, Alabama High School. He has visited Georgia and Florida. He will visit Alabama and Tennessee. And Gabby, when I watch him, like his tape was interesting to me because the thing that kind of stood out to me was you can tell he's a smart player just from his highlights because he understands when to get his hands up at the line of scrimmage to get some PBUs. He's excellent at sniffing out screens and taking those away. We don't talk about football intelligence on a defensive lineman, but he appears to have those kind of natural instincts And you do want to get as many of those type of players as you can. And just the teams that are after him tell you he's well thought of. Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Tennessee, and Miami, of course. He's also versatile with his body type. It looks like he can line up in a lot of different spots. But what can you tell us about Tyson Bacon?
Yeah, I got to visit Miami this spring. And look, he is a big body. I mean, 263, 263. Like he's got some size to him. And to me, the offer sheet tells me everything, right? Just the schools that are involved. I mean, four premier SEC schools, and then Miami. I do think Miami is in a pretty decent position here, going into this kind of phase of his recruitment where he's kind of returning for an official visit. Florida is also a school that's really in the thick of things there. I think Miami's really, really well positioned coming into the official visit too. I think Ohio State's even knocking on the door a little bit as well. So another top tier program in college football that is exploring Tyson Bacon as an option. Again, I think that this is one of those situations. I think he's originally from like the Michigan area. I think he moved down to Alabama, so not a traditional Southern kid who's like from the area, kind of bound to go to the SEC. I think he's kind of open minded to the process. And look, I think that this is going to be a really, really, really important official visit for Miami because I think this is someone who the Hurricanes have an opportunity to potentially close on. But we'll see where things go after the weekend. If Miami can kind of make up some ground or just kind of set a new standard or set the new bar in this recruitment heading into the rest of these visits. But Tyson Bacon is definitely someone I'm kind of keeping a close eye on.
All right. So if I'm giving you, let's wrap it up on this. If I'm giving you only, because these are a lot of names, right, for
Right.
fans to track. If I'm giving you only four guys that you're highlighting that fans should particularly care about the vibes coming off this official visit for these four players, and it's going to be hard because I think there's five that are easy to name, but if
Right.
I'm saying four, who who would you highlight for the fans to be like, okay, pay attention to these four guys in particular this weekend?
Yeah, I'm gonna go James Johnson,
Okay.
the defensive lineman. I'm gonna go Hezzy Kent. I'm gonna
Yep.
go. I'm gonna go Devin Jackson and probably Brett Koolage. Um,
I
and
would agree
then
with all those.
Tyson. Tyson Bacon's an interesting one too, and even Jordan Campbell I think is kind of an interesting one. But I think those
Sure.
four are probably the four that like I think a lot of my focus and attention is going to be on the vibes coming out of those four guys.
All right. Appreciate everyone for listening. Thank you so much for always supporting this podcast. Go check us out on the Inside the U YouTube channel as well. Support our sponsors. Recruiting never stops. Go track us at insidetheu.com. Uh, there is still a subscription sale going on right now, 60% off. Join in on all the fun. Appreciate everyone for listening. And until next time, take care.